change, and we talk about the policies and measures that we need to put in place. But those policies and measures need to be based on solid and robust evidence and scientific evidence. And it's really crucial that the two are linked, and two are linked from the start in dealing with any issue. So that connection between science and policy really need to be made as solid as possible if those policies are going to be successful in their implementation and their results. So this is what we'll be looking at this panel today in a discussion, and I will introduce the panelists in a minute. And what we'll do is I will ask each panelist one question, and if you could take 3 minutes maximum. So if you see my body language changes and I'm approaching you, that means you're approaching the 3 minutes. And then I'd like to bring in the audience, if colleagues would like to share something with us or ask a question, or that would be really welcome. So it can be inclusive. And feel free to come closer as well. There's more space there in the front. And at the end, I'd like to go to each speaker and just ask you one final message that you would like to convey to everyone, something really nice and short that people can remember. Okay? So, Abdel Manam Mohammed, who's the regional coordinator at UNEP in West Asia office, welcome. It's nice to see you, and we can hear you. So let me give you the floor first, so you can set the scene. You have the first question first.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abdel Manam Mohammed. I am the regional coordinator for science policy interface at UNEP regional office for West Asia, based in Beirut. I am very glad and sad that I am not in Sharm el-Sheikh, but I'm very glad that
Okay, so one of the challenges we have here is really the connection. I suggest you turn your camera off and see if it would work.
So I will share some. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes. Okay. Try now that you've got your camera off.
Okay. So I don't know if I should introduce myself again.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Abdel Manam Mohammed. I am the regional coordinator for science policy interface at UNEP regional office for West Asia, based in Beirut. I am glad and sad. Glad because I am part of this great discussion about science policy, which is very close to my heart, and sad that I am not in Sharm el-Sheikh with this group to have a direct interaction with you. So I will be very happy to share some thoughts from UNEP side when it comes to science policy interface. So for us in UNEP,
yes.
Yes, for us in UNEP, science is very, very fundamental to tackle the environmental challenges and empowering governments in evidence-based decision-making. And this is really at the heart of UNEP work. As you know, UNEP is a science-based organization, and we have a very dedicated team, scientists, experts, who are really working on this topic. And we are, a member state-led organization with a mandate and capacity to assess the global environment status and provide decision makers with guidance in addressing the triple planetary crisis. So the science policy interface, is, if you wish, the backbone of UNEP's work for the past 50 years. And considering the importance of the science policy interface and under the leadership of the executive director of UNEP, we, in UNEP, identified 4 reforms to undertake for more robust science policy interface. And I will summarize very quickly these four, areas that we are focusing on related to science policy. So number one, we are focusing in closing the time gap between science and action by improving access to information and by strengthening environmental reporting capacity and producing policy-oriented scientific assessments. So we are focusing on policy relevant assessment. So this is number one. Number two, is we rely much on forecasting and early warning. This is very important to have early warning and scenario building systems to anticipate problems and formulate solutions before the fact. So this will enable us to stay one step ahead of emergencies and put predicted solution at the front of our action. Number three, we focus on the actors to be involved in the policy process beyond the scientific experts and policymakers by engaging private sector, mobilizing the youth, and relying on traditional knowledge and indigenous communities to build a diverse portfolio of actors involved in the decision-making process.
Okay.
Finally,
Yeah.
number four, embracing digital transformation. And this is very crucial for science policy in the process and pathways to stronger science policy interface. And it will be kind of a catalyst to better communication and springing into action. So I'll stop here, and I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdelmanam. And let me now move on to the next speaker, Bruce Campbell from CLIMIT and 10 years at CCAFS. So it would be good if you could share with us your experience on the challenges and the success of this interconnection between science and policy.
Yeah, on the successes, I thought of raising three different issues. Something about ownership, something about supply-driven, and a rather strange one, something about ego. And so let me just explain. Ownership, we set up a whole lot of science policy platforms in West Africa, and it was really crucial that the government actually was in the lead. So for example, in Ghana, it was the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, not the scientists from the international organization. Much more important to give ownership to the national processes. The second one, supply-driven. You know, if you put a livestock scientist in the role of facilitating the science policy, he's going to talk about, he was only wanted to talk about livestock. Or a wheat farmer, a wheat scientist, he's going to want to do wheat. And so it's really important to find the right sort of scientist to be part of the process. Somebody who's more like a facilitator and open to anything. So for example, in Cambodia, we fitted in with the government processes, and we ended up doing a climate smart investment plan. In Costa Rica, it ended up doing agriculture forestry interactions. In Ethiopia, it ended up climate information services. So really being responsive to the national processes rather than pushing one's own agenda. And the third one, ego. I think it's really important to stand behind the process. So allow others to be in the place, to be a facilitator, and we find that builds the trust, and it builds the ownership, and it builds very long-lasting friendships and partnerships with organizations which are really important for impact. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have a mic on this side? Yeah. So Carol, let's can introduce Carol Bouchani Sherfan, who is from ESQUA. And if I may ask you the question about the stage actually of climate change formulation, you know, at what stage does that come with the scientific evidence that has the potential for greater impact?
Well, to have impact, and when we're talking here about the science policy interface, we have to be, in the work of ESQUA, region-specific and responsive. So climate science, as was just mentioned, is there to help inform a process, be it a policy, a project, a plan. And sometimes what happens is when we're developing the science and developing the data, we're not thinking about that end user. So it's very much echoing what you said, making sure that the policy audience is getting the information that you need through the science. Of course, altruism and need for science is always important, but I'll give you a very concrete example of what I mean by this in terms of climate. So the IPCC does wonderful work. It brings together experts from around the world, peer-reviewed journals to have outputs. But the Arab region is not represented in the IPCC. And the League of Arab States that takes care of countries from Morocco to Oman, Muscat, Oman, from Iraq down to Somalia, does not have a tool that comes out of the IPCC global efforts to inform priority setting, policy coherence, positioning on climate action amongst Arab states. So what happened back at COP13 in 2007, the Arab ministers responsible for the environment actually said we need to understand more what climate means for us. So from that mandate, the Arab Ministerial Water Council was mandating regional organizations, including ESCWA, to set up an Arab understanding of climate change so that they could better understand what it means for temperature, what it means for water scarcity, what it means for development at large. And that's how we came up with actually an Arab climate policy report that is based on international standards, the work of Cordex, and that has open access available showing trends for Arab countries in the context. That is not to discount the value of global processes. We need to come together collectively to understand what ways in the world at events like this. But to have region-specific processes that also allow countries to talk on the same language and the same database allows us to get to that next step. So we finished this Arab climate change assessment report about 4 years ago. There's an open knowledge base where people are using, including our colleagues at the FAO, to do assessments related to water availability, water for agriculture, evapotranspiration, information that can feed into then things about ecosystems, forests, etc. But we have now taken it because now the AR6, the assessment report 6, is out with a new set of scenarios. We are one of the first in our region to have a new set of outputs and projections for the Mashriq region because we are working with the World Bank to have an opportunity to have countries both within the Arab states, and we know the politics about Turkey and some things about Turkey regarding water and Iraq and Syria, sandstorms regarding what's happening with the Gulf and Iraq and Iran, to have another common understanding in the Mashriq area, common knowledge base, that again is not available in the global platform. Actually, the IPCC cuts off the Mediterranean edge when you look at outputs and divides off the Gulf. So we have now new Mashriq domains that come out of with the user projections so that the data, again, is responsive to the opportunities for conversation. Neutral platform, neutral data that can be used to create a responsive measures and responsive actions for those partners. So region-specific or transboundary specific, depending on the partners, and then responsive to the needs of policymakers. That's how we'd advance the science policy.
Thank you. That's a good point. Thank you. That's a very good point. Thank you. Let me now move on to Isa Abdurrahman Al-Hashimi. Very pleased really to have you with us, Assistant Undersecretary for Sustainable Communities at the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment from the United Arab Emirates. So thank you for taking the time to join us. And what I want to ask you is the goal that UAE has, the ambition to reach the net zero targets by 2050. So if you could tell us about the roles that science and national innovation systems in UAE really have played in forming this goal.
Well, thank you very much for hosting us today, and I would like also to extend appreciation to FAO and our colleague, esteemed panelist here with us today. When the UAE developed the strategic initiative to achieve net zero, we looked at the different perspectives of what does it mean for us to achieve net zero in 2050. And we realized that in order for us to be able to answer that question, we have to use the power of technology, innovation, research, and development in order for us to design a reasonable and ambitious pathway to achieving net zero. Now, if we want to do net zero today, it might cost us X amount. But if we are looking at the evolvement and maturity of technologies that could help us in doing this, it would bring much more benefits as we learn more about technologies and as innovations progress. Let me use an example. About 7 years ago, we did a solar park in Dubai, and we used 1 square kilometer to produce 1 megawatt of energy, of renewable energy, using solar panels. Fast forward 5 years, and we have the exact same area to produce double the amount of energy. And this is what innovation research brings to the table. And we realize that the power of this is a game changing. And we need to realize those potential and to invest in research, innovation, and technology. As a result, now our national net zero pathway is designed to look at innovations, to look at options of those innovations and how they are evolving and how we can capitalize on them using early entrant mechanisms and support to those technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, it's a good example of linking science to policy as well, and the evidence you mentioned for defining that goal. Let me now invite Fatin Samara, who's a professor of environmental sciences in the Department of Biology, Chemistry, and Environmental Sciences at the American University of Sharjah. And if you could also please share with us, your perspective as a scientist, particularly on what are the major challenges for the uptake and use of scientific results to inform policy formulation in the UAE in particular.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and for the invitation. So I think this is a very important question. As a scientist, I think I wear a few different hats. So I'm an academic, so I'm also teaching, right? I'm doing research, and it kind of puts you in a perspective where you're not only trying to find out solutions or trying to find out the problems, but you're trying to educate the youth of how to implement those or how to find solutions for those issues. And what I found that is a challenge, it is that sort of misconnection, that gap that exists between the scientists in academia or in the research world and then the policymakers. I feel like we do the science, and obviously as a researcher, as an academic, one main goal is to publish. It is for publications. It is to get your work out there. But that's not always the case, because I think you talked about regional level, and I think that's so important because internationally, what is done at a regional level is not always seen as important. And I can give you a perfect example. We wrote this beautiful piece on the consequences of climate change in dust storms and how with climate change, dust storms are going to be increased. Obviously, that's going to have an impact on health. And looking for international journals that will want to take this work forward is become a difficulty. So looking at who can take this regional work and sort of make it as how important it can be at a global level, that is very important. So bridging that gap, using that science to really look into policy, how this can contribute to the making of the policies, that is, I think, a challenge that we need to try and surpass. And I also put the other hat, which is the co-chair of the Climate Change Research Network, and I believe that this is something that the UAE has already perceived. And they created the network because they needed to connect that idea of policymakers need to understand the science. Yeah. And combining the scientists in the region, the researchers with the partners, the industries, and the government, it is a very important challenge. And I think that we have a very important initiative because I think it's a first of its kind in the region. So we're hoping that this is something that will help bridge that gap.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. And as I promised earlier, after this first row of questions, let's see if anyone in the audience has any comments, anything to add. I hope we have a spare microphone. So just put your hand up. It would be good to hear from you as well. Anything you would like to add or share with us, that would be with pleasure. Any volunteers, any question? We have a question from here.
Thanks very much. So there's two of us sitting here who are actually on the high-level expert group for the European Union on the science
Great.
policy interface. And I don't know, maybe not all of you had a chance to read it or to react to it, but one of the major conclusions that we had was that we saw there was a whole ecosystem of how science policy makes its way, into policy making. And I think what I'm very curious about is whether you think that actually what we have today is fit for purpose, or whether we need to create a whole different way of thinking about how science policy is delivered. I mean, I very much like what Bruce was saying. It's sort of, it matters where you're trying to put the science policy to work. So, what was your reaction to the reports that the Commission submitted, or the European Union submitted? And how do you think we could go forward with this huge ecosystem of advisory bodies that all need to come together? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Let's see if there is another point or question, and then I'll ask the panelists to react. Any other question or comment? Okay, so I think the main question there is fitness for purpose for the linkages between science and policy. So this is a good chance for each panelist to react to that, to give your views, and put that perhaps in the context of where we are now for the climate action. Let me start with Abdel Manam. You see, we can still see you. So did you hear the question very well?
Yes, I heard the question, and thank you for the great question from Dr. Jackie. I know her very well from UNEP time when she was leading the science division. Yeah, I think when we talk about the fit for purpose from the regional point of view, I think as Ms. Carol rightly said, in our region, in the Arab region, I think we are lagging behind, and we really need to work very close to close the gap between the scientists and the policy. And in UNEP, we are considering this in the regional office. We are initiating a scientific consortium in the region that's really build kind of a network between the scientists and the policymakers, so that we really come with more action to achieve our targets. And I would like also to reiterate the importance of the technology, as Mr. Isa Al-Hashmi mentioned. This is why we are considering digital transformation as accelerator and as enabler to really achieve the climate targets. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Bruce?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question. So it is a very complex ecosystem, and I think the way you do it at the European Union level versus national level will obviously be all very different, and different countries will do it differently. But the one that I've seen work really well, and perhaps I won't mention the country, is a pretty famous scientist, very well respected in the scientific community and popularly known amongst the community, not a civil servant, brought into the chief scientific office for a certain number of years, and be able to command huge respect and be able to draw the right people into the ecosystem for the particular policy process. That's the one that I saw, which I thought was really impressive.
Great, thank you. Isa?
I'll be very honest. I haven't read your report, so I wouldn't very much be able to comment on this. But the way that we see the role of science to support decision making as well as policy making is the fact that it is crucial that we have this information on two levels, so on a national level and on a regional level. We are working with a challenge that is transboundary. It is not just relevant to a specific nation. And we definitely need a collective action for us to better understand the transboundary effect of such dilemma and such challenge in order for regional efforts to take place and to combat such challenge. So I would think that there should be also some sort of an engagement between countries and the dialogue in different regions to facilitate this. Now, this could happen through some of the regional research centers, such as the one that we have with ESCWA, or something on a leading national institute. Thank you.
Great, thank you. You have a mic, Carol?
Fit for purpose, the favorite word of every international organization right now. I think we have to start, though, not the fitness, we have to start with the purpose. And that's that responsiveness that I was referring to. So if you're talking global at the COP to discuss, there's one type of science base. If you're talking at the region, what we have done increasingly, actually with the with the FAO and our other partners, is look at watersheds. Watersheds, be they national watersheds or aquifer systems or transboundary. Initially, we would only think about the transboundary as the conflict, but even at the national level where there's across borders on subdivisions, we're looking at watersheds so that there could be common policies thought about that involve more than one governorate or muhafaza or whatever system you have. So that helps to think about the context of climate. And if you have an assessment, then you can take, and thanks to GIS, you can do everything now. You can take all the remote sensing and all the complex NetCDF files that you get out of climate models, and that's what we do, actually translate that into usable maps that, red, yellow, and green, stoplight. What is the most vulnerable part? Something that can be communicated very easily, digested, giving analytics that a policy audience or a project audience can understand. That can help that interface. So I think the tools are there. The question is making sure that you know your objective. And I would just also add one thing that we are increasingly helping governments is also think about the climate rationale of projects. We often think policy. So policy is very big. But if you think about a project that sometimes are, $100 million, $50 million, is basically a policy, an instrument. If you have good science to inform what that is, and then you use that science to also maybe help some monitoring or metrics as implementation comes on. There are opportunities there to really get into the system, but it depends on the ecosystem, the watershed, the governorate, the country, or the region that you're looking at. So I would start with purpose before I think about fitness.
Thank you. Fatin?
So I think I can bring a little bit of a different perspective. So there are two main aspects. I believe that investing funding into the research, that is a very important aspect that I think scientists will bring always that up. We want to get those ideas, we can execute, but we want that support. We want those institutions that will be supporting that research. And something else that I have found that is a big gap, I think, within the research community. We do know how to write technical papers. We do know how to write a whole scientific paper, but we do not know how to write policy. And I believe that that is a gap that currently exists. Give us the tools as policymakers. If we can get the tools on how to write those small policy pieces, we can transform then our research, our findings, into something that can be, I think, more suitable for those policymakers that maybe are not familiar with all the technicalities. So I think that is something that is lacking, and I think that is something that we will benefit from, and I'm sure that the other side will benefit as well.
Great, thank you. Is there any other comment or any other comments from the audience? Okay, well, thank you. As I said earlier, I think I'd like to go through the panelists and just have one final message to sum up what you want to say, what you want to convey in a brief way. And I'll start with you again, Abdul Manam.
Thank you. For us in UNEP, I think through our, based on our medium-term strategy, we have identified three pillars, if you wish, for our work: climate action, biodiversity or nature action, and pollution action. So I think the main message I'm trying to convey here that we need really to connect the dots together. We cannot really only focus on the climate action and forgetting about the nature action. We need to really bring all these three pillars together so that we live in harmony with nature and address all what we call planetary crisis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bruce?
So I often think of the national level, so I'm thinking of that, not regional, global, but we definitely need more science-driven policy. And I think for that to happen, we really need science officers or some kind of structure, institutional structure, that really does have access to cabinet, and there's a very senior level scientist in charge of such an office.
Great, thank you. Isa?
Thank you. I think from a bit of a different direction. I think climate change is a global threat, but it brings many opportunities. And it provides a lot of space for innovators to come on board with ideas and products that could help us in here. So I would only urge everybody to innovate in this area. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Fatin?
I think I just need to reiterate again the idea of give us the tools, empower the scientists, as you mentioned, put somebody that is an expert in the science to mix with that science policy interface. And there is a lot that can happen. And I believe that in the case of the UAE, we're trying to go through that direction with the Climate Change Research Network. I believe that this can be not only a regional or a local idea, but it can be something that can go also at an international level.
Great, thank you. Carol?
I'm just going to highlight that there is a lot of science there. Okay, so it's not like we're starting at scratch. There is a knowledge base. The question is that connectivity. The connectivity is between the scientists and the policymakers. But I think as the policymakers widen their loop and mainstream climate into their thinking, there's even more ways to infiltrate knowledge. So, right now, I was taking care of the water pavilion yesterday. There's not a lot of water ministries here. Climate is all about water in this region. There's a lot of agriculture because FAO and a lot of our partners brought them here. But the idea is you can create opportunities for mainstreaming, and those other sectors use science, and then together, collectively, you create that network that will influence collectively how to mainstream climate into decision-making, into development planning, but also the policy itself has to be connected, and that's how it filters in. So hopefully the next COP over in the UAE will have a lot more integrated participation as we widen the loop from the science to the policy.
Great, thank you, Carol. For me, is the localization of this interface is really the linkage. We talk often about the science policy link in the broader sense, but I think what I heard is really that localization, science to policy that reflects the local circumstances and culture and really specificities that have to be respected for that policy to work. And that's what I picked up. So thank you again, everyone. Thanks to all the panelists. Thank Abdelmanan for staying with us and well connected, which is great. And thank you to everyone on the audience. Thank you.